Welcome to our Hangout series, Innovation by Design, which is designed for innovation, design thinking, and IoT design leaders to share what's working for them, as well as the tips that can make others more successful. Today, our Hangout topic is how to accelerate your IoT journey with design. So over the next hour, our IoT design experts will be MIT and Accenture. So as I mentioned in the chat, or Silaj mentioned in the chat, Stan LeBlanc and Decker notified us this morning they had a family emergency and very much apologize they could not be here. But we're going to have a lively dialogue from our experts here today. So thank you very much for joining in, Sanjay and Theo. And we'll explore how companies can leverage design to accelerate their momentum into the smart, connected world of meaningful products and services. Now, let me go ahead and introduce our panelists. First, we have Sanjay Sarma. He's the professor of mechanical engineering at MIT. He's the first dean of digital learning at MIT. He co-founded the Auto at MIT and developed many of the key technologies behind the EPC suite of RFID standards now used worldwide. He's also authored over 75 academic papers in computational geometry, sensing, RFID, automation, and CAD. And of course is the recipient of numerous awards for teaching and research. Very impressive, and we're very, very happy to have you here, Sanjay.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rich.
And then we have Theo Forbath, who is Managing Director in Accenture Products Group. And in his role, Theo envisions and implements the company's technology advisory services practice. These offerings include like strategies for the new IoT, cloud advisory, digital architecture, security, artificial intelligence, blockchain, and disruptive management for blue chip companies. All the buzzwords we hear these days. Theo's a leader on how organizations can develop a culture of innovation, so perfect for this hangout, and develop new business models within a data-rich world. Theo has partnered with Harvard and MIT, so very appropriate panelists today, on researching the intersection and impact of technology and design on business strategy. Welcome, Theo.
Thank you very much, Gretchen.
And I am Gretchen Hoffman, VP of Marketing at Altitude. My role today is as the moderator. And Altitude, for anyone who doesn't know, is a design and innovation consulting firm based in Boston. We were acquired by Accenture's Product Innovation Group last year. We have clients like Under Armour, Nike, Thermo Scientific, to name a few. So now, for what you're really waiting for, let's get to the questions so you can hear from the panelists. And what would be great is if we can kick this off, and Sanjay, I'll start with you. If we can have each panelist share some real examples of how design has impacted by smart connected products.
Okay, Theo, why don't you go first?
Okay, sure. You know, I think it's creeping up on us in almost everything we do in our life now. Anything that costs more than $50 within the next few years will be connected to some network. And what we're seeing is that we don't even realize it. Things like our AirPods or any of the wireless devices that we're using today, and even our autonomous cars and our connected homes, it's something that we're all just beginning to understand in how the convergence of physical and digital experiences are beginning to open up new opportunities for value and removing friction really from our life. You look at the voice interface, which is really becoming almost the de facto expectation for us to interact with the world around us as we move into a much more ubiquitous experience with technology. We're going to continue to see it be much more responsive and begin to be able to preemptively understand our needs, whether it's a car that knows you need to brake before you're able to get your foot onto the brake pedal, or whether it's coming into your home and knowing that you're nearby, and so we're turning up the heat in the house or we're putting on the music you like. Sanjay, over to you.
Thank you, Theo. I couldn't agree with you more. I have maybe the same thing, but I sort of look at it slightly differently. In fact, I just wrote a book about it. I see the Internet of Things as a new design language. Okay, and I'm going to use an analogy. The analogy is, imagine buildings and architecture before electricity. You don't have internal lightings, you had to have candles. You don't have elevators, so you had stairs, and the buildings can be too tall. You didn't have heating and cooling, right? You didn't have indoor plumbing, you can pump water, so you don't have upstairs bathrooms. Electricity comes along, and the architect's craft has changed. The architect is unleashed. So what we talk about in my book is, and what I believe, is that the Internet of Things is a new language for fundamentally rethinking products. And products now cease to be these things you buy and then wave goodbye at the store, and possession is yours, both from the company side and from the consumer side, and they become experiences. And the Internet of Things is a language for creating experiences. So no longer now is for example, a coffee machine. It is something that owns your morning experience. So I believe that we are entering, because not just of the Internet of Things, but because of things like machine learning, a new age where we can engineer experiences using this new design language, which is the Internet of Things and all the other technologies that come along with it.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I think you're absolutely. I was just going to build on that for 1 second, Gretchen, because I think really what the implication of that is for businesses is, how do you craft a branded experience? How do you understand that the value you deliver every day to your customers and the way they're going to engage with you and recognize you is not through a slogan or a logo or a TV advertisement, but the experience that your customers have with your products and services. So it becomes increasingly vital that you build design thinking into that moment from the beginning. And as you said, Sanjay, now you need to create these congruent experiences that cut across the physical and digital.
Yeah, and in fact, a step further I would take along with those precise lines is, experiences don't stop at the product, right? Again, let's look at the coffee machine. In the old world, in the product-oriented world, you sold a coffee machine. In the new world, you may be a coffee machine vendor, but you better own the morning experience, so your coffee machine still plays a role on it, right? So,
Right.
My book, we call it inversion, the inversion factor. What we're saying is, forget product, invert yourself and figure out how to own the experience. So the coffee machine can't stop at just making coffee. I like to listen to NPR in the morning when my coffee machine, my Nespresso's, brewing, right? I would love it if
Right.
the moment I put my ristretto in, it just talked to my Echo and said, read the guy the news. Because now the coffee machine is more embedded in my life. So the boundary between the product and the consumer blurs, but also the boundary between products blurs.
Yeah, very much. And that whole end-to-end experience, I mean, you really have to look at where it starts and stops, right? Very much so. Now, you said, Sanjay, that it's the inversion experience is the book. Is that on Amazon?
Actually, I happen to have it here. It's the inversion factor. Yeah.
Oh, the inversion factor.
Yeah, and it's on Amazon. Yeah.
Oh, great. I'd be very curious to see it. All right. Well, let me jump into another angle here. Can you share what you're doing specifically with IoT and design today and how you see it evolving? I think you've talked a little bit about that. So maybe just along the path, maybe Sanjay, you've written the book. What else are you doing that you're seeing with IoT and design?
Yeah, I see it permeating, right? I mean, about 50 years ago, Theodore Levitt, who was a professor of business at Harvard Business School, said, when you sell a 1/4-inch drill, are you selling a drill or are you selling a hole? Which is sort of an existential question, right? Because actually people aren't buying the drill, they want a hole. And the problem with products is they are just one step towards fulfilling a need, right? But if you can uncover the deeper need and with this new design language meet it, then if you as a product manufacturer aren't meeting that need, you're going to get left out. So Uber solves my need for transportation. And if I'm Ford, I sell cars, but I might not need a car anymore because Uber just solved my problem, right? So this business of peeling back the onion, I think, and I've been deeply involved in it, obviously, for 20 years, is happening everywhere. So if you're a mattress company, you got to think about it. In fact, I was talking to a mattress company called 8 Sleep that does this. Are you in the business of selling mattresses? Or are you in the business of making sleep better? Right?
Absolutely right. And I think what's so exciting is that we're in the earliest days right now. So you can create the end-to-end experience if you're managing a very discrete experience, such as an Uber driver taking you from point A to point B. But the example Sanjay used earlier around asking your coffee maker to talk to your Echo, those types of connections are still being done in fairly proprietary ways today. And so we're looking at a very long, I think, planning horizon till we get to this kind of nirvana state where things will recognize other products and services as they begin to appear in our lives and understand how to integrate with them. And this connectivity between what will eventually be a plethora of microservices is something that's going to take a long time to sort out, I believe.
Yeah, I agree completely. And in fact, maybe I'll even go a step further and just
And the
say that I'm just building on what Theo just said. Connectivity right now is occurring in walled gardens, right? So you buy into the Apple ecosystem, or you buy into the Google ecosystem, or you buy into the Amazon ecosystem. But those walled gardens and that, which was security and privacy, but also because each of them thought they could own the world. That is beginning to pass. So the walled gardens have started to break down a little bit because of things like if this, then that, IFTTT, et cetera, et cetera. But actually, Amazon itself is an excellent example of this, right? So Amazon, if you remember when Jeff Bezos started his company, he sold you books. Now, he doesn't care whether you buy a book or not. He wants to own reading, right? Because you can get the book on Kindle, so it doesn't matter if you don't buy a physical book. Now you can have the book read out to you on the Amazon Echo. So if you move the frontier between you and the customer closer and closer to the experience, you can also leverage other opportunities adjacent. And that's what he's done. And of course, they do retail. So the Echo is both reading my book and my news and buying stuff.
So, I mean, this is a great dialogue, and I'm going to cut right to the chase from the standpoint of the name of the hangout, how to accelerate your IoT journey with design. So let's very specifically say, how can design help to accelerate a company's journey into IoT?
Yeah.
And I don't know, Theo, do you want to jump in here?
Well, Theo, go ahead.
As long as you continue to apply, I think, the fundamentals of design thinking, starting with the user and the moment of wow or really delight or making my life easier, and what you're trying to address there, and how it might be different and why you're really attacking this problem. And if you can really unpack those questions, then I continue to believe that in many cases the technology is quickly getting to the point where we can solve a lot of these problems. And as Sanjay mentioned earlier, it's really beginning to be able to understand how to just not design for the connectivity between things and people, but how to bring in this layer of intelligence and machine learning and leverage things like vision learning so that you can begin to contextualize experiences. And I think that's really the opportunity and the challenge for designers today, is that what we want is not an omni-channel experience in how we interact with the brands. We want a my-channel experience, and we want the things that and the services that we expect from the brands that we trust to understand us in a deeper and more profound way than ever before. So whether it's the fact that Uber knows that when I wake up on Monday morning, I'm going to be going to Logan Airport, and what kind of car I'd like to have to take me there, and when I need it there, we're going to see these services that are going to become increasingly a fabric of our lives, because I can order my Uber right from my Echo now, will allow us to actually begin to design for moments of microservices improving and delighting us without having to rely on a phone or a computing device to do it.
Yeah, that's well put. Well put. You know, it's sort of interesting. I was reading about how Uber was founded. And so it turns out that the founders were, I think, in Paris. It was sleeting. They needed a taxi. And of course, it's very difficult to get a taxi in Paris, even in the best of times sometimes. And one of the founders to the other, and he says, I wish I could do this. And they look at each other and go, wow, we know how to do this, right? And that's how Uber was founded. Now, one of the points that I keep talking about, and I have to be careful about saying this, but I think with this audience I can, and I didn't put it in, but I sort of mentioned it in the book because it's a more general audience, is for technology savvy people, we're in a very special time. Technology is like magic. It has become pretty damn powerful. So if you have what I call the what if thought, what if I could do this? You can probably do it. And so that's why I think this is the era of design. In fact, I say to people, I'm the geek, right? I'm the nerd who knows, 6-low-pan protocols and modulation. And I'm saying to people, but I'm a designer, is that for the first time, actually more than any other time, this is an era for unleashing the fundamental principles of design and looking for the hidden needs, because technology can probably meet them. It's a very special time.
Yeah, and as many pundits are fond of saying, the rate of change will only get faster. So if you begin to kind of wrap your head around that, we just celebrated the 10-year anniversary of the iPhone. We all now carry around these digital Swiss Army knives that are actually pretty crummy phones, but provide a plethora of services that we used to pay tens, if not hundreds of dollars for a Garmin in our car that was a dedicated GPS system, could never tell us traffic patterns, could never reroute us in real time at the level that we're seeing with a Waze today, where, within moments of an accident, less than a mile ahead of you, you will know that you're going to be approaching it. And so that kind of almost real-time insight to the world around us is that magic. And that's only going to continue. That pace of opportunity and change that we are living through right now is only going to continue to pick up steam. As we see cars communicate with each other and with the roads and with the tunnels, it's such an exciting
As a
time.
professor,
That really is.
I'm just going to throw in one thing. By the way, just along those points, I just want to pick up what Theo said, which is that the mobile phone is the magic wand of IoT. I would argue that Uber is an IoT play, because it turns a dumb car into a smart car. It makes a dumb car trackable, communicatable, and the driver is sort of part of the machine, so to say. In fact, the moment they can have self-driving cars, so Uber's going to dump drivers tragically, right? So Uber is an IoT play more than anything else. The only additional thing I'll say is that with any design, there are upsides, any superpower, right? You have upsides and you got to be careful. And security and privacy are things that as a culture we need to think through, and as designers we need to think through.
Absolutely. And I would add on top of that, how we use our customers' personal data. Because the reality is that most consumers today don't understand how much of their personal data they're giving up by carrying around these magical wands, as you call them, Sanjay. Hey, Sanjay, I don't know if it's just me, but your video is not coming through.
Yeah.
You want to check
your camera?
See it fine, right? Yeah, we can see you. The listeners can see. Sometimes video, it doesn't work as well for us here, but we can see
No problem.
Okay, but thank you.
Great. So let's keep going.
So we've talked about experiences. So it'd be interesting, Theo, maybe just to add what comes first when you're designing for IoT. Talk about, is it technology, is it the customer, and why?
Yeah, I think for many years as designers, there was this belief that you really needed to just focus on the user. I mentioned this earlier. It's really a fundamental tenet of human-centered design and design thinking. But what I'm seeing right now is we're at this moment, this what if moment that Sanjay talked about, where you actually have to really design with the technology in tandem. So recently working with a client on designing experiences for the connected home and really trying to push the limits of intelligent automation, if you will. So how can the home begin to recognize a face, for example, if someone comes up to the door and you're not home, that moment when we want to let the Amazon driver into our house, let them put the perishables in our refrigerator, but we don't want them walking into our living room. We don't want them going and snooping around the entire house. And so how can we control that experience, both allow that Amazon person to come in, and in trying to design for that experience, we really had to look very closely at vision recognition, AI, motion detectors, and connecting all of those. And so I think that is something that really begins to expand the number of interdisciplinary team members that you need. So it's not just the designer, the digital designer, the industrial designer. Maybe you have a strategist and a technologist on the team, but now you need a data scientist. You need an AI expert. You need a vision learning person. You need someone who really understands how to connect all of these services and begin to, again, contextualize for that moment. So I think it's a layer of complexity now that is not just designing for the user or the technology, but you have to design together as one team.
And also making sure that we're clear, right? Like we're designing not for technology's sake because it's IoT and everyone wants to try everything, whether it's AI or whatever, but making sure that we know what the customer cares about, right? What their needs are that are being addressed. And you see companies that get excited by all the latest and greatest technologies and try to force that in, right? And I think it's an important time to remember what problem are you solving for, what is really going to address the customer experience.
And to wow them and not spook them.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
For the first time, we're able to really begin to understand what's happening sometimes before the customer themselves do. So as someone's walking up to your house, if you're beginning to have the house acknowledge who they are before they've even rung the doorbell, well, that can get a little creepy.
Yeah. It's interesting. We're talking about, how the experience can evolve as we do work with Smart Connected and all the new technologies. And also there were some comments about the data, right, that we generate, from, frankly, I think it's more the insights that we derive from the data. I think it would be interesting to look at how do you see designing for IoT evolving over time and even further impacting people's lives. I mean, you've given some examples so far, but, as we look at when we iterate and we iterate and reiterate with design, from the data and the insights we're learning, there's a whole plethora of experiences that could happen. So I'd love any additional comments that you could take on that.
There is an incredible amount of what we think of as digital exhaust that we're all generating just by moving through the world today. But I think what we're waiting for are those moments that become tipping points. So many of us have played with wearable devices. The average wearable ends up in a drawer after about 90 days. Not the average, but 9 out of 10 wearables don't end up being worn after about 3 months. So what is that tipping point that's going to change that? We're seeing certainly a lot of early adopters now with the iWatch and some of the other Fitbits, but I'm looking at moments where it really begins to change my ability to understand what's going on inside of my body. The moment that wearable can identify that first cancer cell, I think we'll all be adopting them. And believe it or not, it's probably not that far off. We're already seeing the magic wands, our mobile phones being used for doing blood monitoring or our heartbeat monitoring, and also even for eye exams. So we're going to see some advances happen very quickly as the photo technology, the image technology in our phones get more and more advanced, and we introduce 3D and AR and VR, mixed reality into our daily lives, the magic is going to become more and more powerful.
And I'd add to that by saying that, so in my lab and through my companies and my consulting and so on, much of which actually is with Accenture, we do a lot of work in everything from wearables to augmented reality to virtual reality to obviously all sorts of IoT to smart buildings and so on. To Theo's point, I think the tipping point appears when, I'm going to use my coffee machine example. How does the coffee machine know that I'm downstairs, right? So it can trigger. Well, the tipping point is when it can assume that I have a wearable on 70% of the time, right? So 60, 70% of consumers wear either a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or a Rolex gold watch, which has been dragged into the 21st century and has a Bluetooth connection, right? So when that happens, and when that becomes the assumption, for example, it is the assumption today that people have smartphones. It is the assumption today that you have email. It is an assumption, Gretchen, earlier today when we were debugging the system, that you could send me an email, right? That's the assumption. Of course, you had to call me, but that's a whole other story. The point, though, is that when you can make that assumption, and when ecosystems are built with the assumption, that's when the critical mass has been achieved, and we're approaching that time. Right? So the coffee machine can assume that the Bluetooth on my Apple Watch can tell it, A, that I'm downstairs, right? The heart rate is high, so maybe it should titrate the caffeine down a bit, right? That's when the fire takes off.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've talked about, the coffee machine. We've talked about what's happening with, autonomous vehicles. Theo, you mentioned some on medical. Let's dive in a little bit on verticals or industry specific. Like, are there specific verticals or industries you see that are capitalizing on the shift to IoT products and services before others? Like, who's getting a jump and why are they getting a jump? And Theo, do you want to jump in first, or?
Sure. I mean, it's really where there are burning platforms in a lot of cases, and particularly in the B2B world, as you begin to look at what we call the legacy tax that many companies are paying for having almost ignored the fact that they're still running their businesses on 20, 30, 40-year-old platforms, that when you recognize you can introduce some of these new capabilities, what we call the new muscle of IT, into your business, you can automate the manufacturing floor end to end. You can begin to get end-to-end visibility into your supply and demand chain because you are using active RFID on your inventory. And so for the B2B world, it's really the payback, the business case becomes very clear very quickly as you begin to see the benefits of being able to trace expensive equipment from the moment it leaves your manufacturing plant till it ends up on a client site. And then you begin to understand how a client is using that equipment. You can continuously improve it. Or for a client of ours who is one of the largest manufacturers of moving equipment, of moving dirt, of actual mining equipment, if they can understand in advance how many trucks they need to bring into a mine to pull out the dirt before they get at the ore, that insight begins to save them huge amounts of money. And as they begin to instrument those trucks and actual tires on those trucks so that they can predict when a tire needs to be replaced, instead of having that truck with hundreds of tons of dirt or ore in it break down and shut down the entire mine operation, sometimes for up to a full day, losing really millions of dollars potentially in revenue. And just that simple investment in being able to monitor the tire and the tire pressure, and then gaining the insight over time of when those tires fail so that you can replace them proactively, pays for itself the first time you avoid a shutdown or the first time you avoid a flat tire. So we're seeing in every industry moments like that now, where it just is a no-brainer, if you will, to make that investment.
Yeah. Sanjay, do you want to
Yeah,
add
I think that,
anything, or?
technologies take off. They have to cross the chasm, so to say, right? And they take off in verticals often. And any technology, for example, cell phones. I was talking to one of the cell phone execs a couple of decades ago, and he said the place it was taking off was real estate agents, because they're waiting for customers to shop, and that was a great place to have a phone that didn't have a wire attached to it. Now, I do think that IoT will take off in a couple of industrial sectors, but strongly in the consumer sector. The consumer sector, because the consumer has outpaced industry in acceptance of new technologies, because of things like life hacking, things like smartphones, which showed up in our hands before corporate went to smartphones, right? So the Nest, all these are examples. Now, in industry sectors, there are some that need it and some that will take it up earlier. I don't think all the industries like healthcare could really benefit, but healthcare is not an easy industry to work with, frankly. And I'm hoping they will accelerate the adoption of some of these technologies. But things like maintenance operations, airport operations, pipelines, oil, construction. These are places where supply chain, for example, right? Mining, which is sort of the example that you used. These are places where it'll start in small areas, and once there's critical mass, it'll grow very fast. So I think we'll see a few verticals light up, but I do think consumer IoT is going to accelerate, especially because of other things, as again, to pick up on Theo's example, such as our increasing reliance on online commerce, our increasing reliance on voice interfaces, our increasing reliance on security cameras, right, which do image recognition and tell you, if it's a person outside your door. So because of all that, I'm actually very bullish on consumer. The other thing I'll say is that, again, picking up on something Theo said earlier, there is a company, it's actually an MIT-founded company called Empatica, and it's a wearable that can detect things like epilepsy, so it's very vertical. And it's a combination of IoT and connectivity and big data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I also think that we will see it grow in niche areas. So, for example, sportsmen, sportswomen, certain health conditions, and hopefully these islands will connect up soon. But initially, it'll be verticals, with consumer being a massive vertical, in my view.
I couldn't agree with you more, and you just have to look at the Olympics that are going on right now to understand the art of the possible. We have, for the first time, a petri dish of opportunities to explore new experiences with what's called the 5G technology. That's the next generation of wireless technology. So as you watch all these athletes, you'll see that many of them have sensors on their bodies. And in fact, those sensors are being used to actually determine who's gaining the most height off of a half-pipe snowboarding event, and are actually giving us the opportunity to understand what that experience is like for those athletes as they take on these incredible superhuman types of events. So it's a moment at which technology is going to continue to leapfrog as we see this next generation of wireless technology allow us to have broadband type of experiences on our phones that we now only have in our homes. And so that and the breakthroughs that I expect we'll see in battery power, one of the real limiters right now in being able to bring all of this to life, and increasingly intelligent sensor technology is really going to be a game changer. But it will be those industries where there's a really strong business case, whether it's a Disney World that's facing Harry Potter opening up across the street, and the arms race that Disney entered into, forcing them to really try and leapfrog again with the Magic Band experience in the park, where you no longer need to carry money You no longer need to have tickets. You no longer have to worry about losing your kids. And oh, by the way, Mickey Mouse is going to know your kid's name when he meets him or her for the first time automatically.
Kind of a wild thought. Yeah. So we had UnitedHealth on one of the hangouts recently, and it was interesting listening to them on some of the impact with healthcare, as you mentioned a bit earlier. But one of the examples, they had given was, as you look at the iPhone, all that they're doing to try to look at behavior with the iPhone. So for example, if someone's swiping on the iPhone and behavior starts to change erratically, they may come back and say maybe there's a mental health issue. And then they immediately are connected and notify that person of resources that might be able to help them. And so it's just, it's kind of amazing as you look at, the additional services that can come about as you're monitoring all that data and behavior. So anyway, it's interesting hearing some of their examples also from that industry.
And I could see a lot of people finding that creepy, Gretchen, just to kind of riff on that. I mean, I think, for an elderly person, having that kind of connection to a healthcare provider is very valuable. For a young person, they could say, well, maybe I just am having too much to drink and I don't want UnitedHealthcare or anybody else to know that I have erratic behavior because I'm, having a good time on Friday night. So this is uncharted territory. Right. Yeah. And that's a point Sanjay raised earlier, right? We are in what I think of as almost an Xbox Nation period where you're going to buy your next car because you are in an Apple ecosystem, or you're going to buy, your next car has to be an Android enabled car, not an Apple car, because guess what? They don't interact well today. And so we're going to see ourselves making some decisions based on which of these ecosystems we're connecting into, I think, for at least the next 4 or 5 years.
In fact, as you may have seen, there was recently some research, computer vision can actually recognize a person's sexuality. Computer vision, right?
Right. I saw that. Yeah. And that, that gets creepy, right? And Netflix was doing it by what shows we were watching.
And then the other one is, I think it's a matter of time before I can use Google or Google Voice or Amazon Echo to determine if someone has, what their mental status, as you said, right? Or whether they have depression, right? So it gets, so these are pretty foundational questions, also design thinking questions. And we need to figure out how to build trust.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And incorporate the privacy and security. So a couple things for the listeners. Just want to make sure that you remember that we will take your questions in the last 10 to 15 minutes. So please be sure to submit your questions or vote on the ones you want to make sure we ask first in the Ask a Questions tab. All right. And also, if you take the polls, it's very helpful for us to know who's on and where you are in terms of your IoT journey. So with that, I thank you. Also, we do have folks engaged in Twitter. So altitude_Inc. We'd love to hear from you. So with that, we've talked about all the new technologies. Sanjay, would love to hear a little bit more from you to start on some of the new technologies. We've talked about AI, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, unmanned autonomous vehicles like drones, or we've talked about, what's happening with self-driving cars. What are you seeing now with these, and maybe talk about the impact on IoT and how they influence design? We've talked a little bit about it, but more specific.
Yeah. So I don't know if you can hear me, folks. Gretchen, you cut out there for a second, talking about technology we take for granted in the internet. It's still a little bit spotty sometimes. But the technology, as I said earlier, that in my view, technology is becoming like magic. I was talking yesterday to one of my colleagues, and he was showing how his students at MIT, they actually fertilize an egg, look for a particular disease, and use gene editing technologies to remove the eggs that have a particular, in this case, I think a particular disease, right? I mean, this is the magic. These are the magical things that are possible. They were doing this, just so you know, with human embryos, which then are destroyed according to some ethical guidelines that the government has established. Now, by the way, those guidelines exist in this country, but the guidelines vary from country to country, which also creates all sorts of issues. So what we're seeing with technology is pretty unbelievable advances on many fronts. I'll take another example, quantum computing. Now, quantum computing is, again, one of these magical things where you can essentially parallelize computing by using what Einstein called spooky physics, quantum mechanics. Now, if quantum computing takes off, it could throw into question everything we take for granted in cryptography, which means we need to rethink a lot of stuff. Another incredible, or certainly well-known breakthrough is in distributed ledgers. Now, people would argue that some aspects of Bitcoin are gimmicky and maybe it's a bubble. But leaving that aside, the fact that the most regulated industry on the planet, which is currency, is currently going through disruption, is in and of itself cause for us to pause and take notice. But the distributed ledger concept is actually pretty amazing, because with the distributed ledger, you're able to get away from a centralized authority and go to a highly decentralized situation, which, for example, if you consider refugees whose IDs have been destroyed, and you can reconstruct it and not depend on a single government, the implications are extraordinary. So everything from physics to chemistry to biology to brain science, neuroscience to healthcare, all the way to things like, of course, the technologies we discussed, but also social breakthroughs like freelancing, e-lancing, distributed crowdsourcing, etc. We're in a very special time. And what a designer is able to do today, more than any other time, is if you can identify the sort of the what if question that I mentioned in my book, or identify a core unmet need for the first time, or at a level hitherto unprecedented, you can take this vast vocabulary, these new nouns and verbs in this new language. IoT is just a binding element of it, but it's machine learning or CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing, and craft solutions that even 10 years ago we would have thought we were playing was science fiction.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. I'm looking at a question here, Gretchen. We were asked to introduce ourselves. I'll let you do that part. But one thing I wanted to address is this idea that Martin has about how can you apply some of the practical uses of IoT in industries that deal in intangibles, such as financial services and wealth management. I think that's a great question. And I think what we're going to see is the adoption of these technologies by the folks who have the disposable income and the resources is going to be something that's going to be a differentiator. It's going to create those wow moments in new construction homes, where you are going to have cameras with facial recognition, where you are going to have speakers embedded throughout the house, and the soundtrack that you like to hear on Friday night when you come in the door will automatically be on. But I think the other piece of it is the insurance industry. We're going to see the insurance industry, I think, change dramatically due to IoT, and it's going to become more a risk aversion industry. And we'll be with some of them today are looking at some of the wealth of data they have around what are some of the largest causes of accidents in homes. Well, it turns out one of them, believe it or not, is water damage. And the number one area where this happens is a rubber hose on the back of a washer that wears out. And if that washer is not in the basement, but is on the first or second floor of a house, that is one of the most expensive reimbursements that an insurance industry has to go after. So you'll see more and more of the high-end insurance industries sending you things like sensor detectors for waters for your home, or even offering to install an automatic shutoff for your home if the sensor detects water and you're away. So you can begin to imagine how we're going to see this IoT connected world we're entering, coupled with AI and orchestrated microservices, begin to change the game. particularly for people who can afford it in their homes today.
Yeah, absolutely. And Theo, thanks for flagging that. Looks like Barbara had asked, could I reintroduce the speakers? So just to make sure folks know, that was Theo Forbath, the Managing Director at Accenture Products, who was just speaking. And our other panelist is Sanjay Sarma, who is Professor of Mechanical Engineering at MIT. And also I'd mentioned earlier on that Stanley Black & Decker had a family emergency, notified us right before the hangout. So we hope all is well there, but he was apologetic and unable to join us. So hopefully that answers the question in terms of who is speaking. So with that, again, remind folks, do put your questions into the ask a question tab. We will get to those shortly. And I'd like to jump back in terms of our panel dialogue. We've talked a lot about how to accelerate your IoT journey with design, which is the topic today. Let's talk about the challenges companies are facing as they move deeper into the world of IoT and discuss how are they overcoming some of these challenges. Theo, do you want to jump in?
Sure. I mean, I think it's really around investing in new types of talent and expanding your partnership ecosystem and recognizing the idea of being able to do these end-to-end solutions are going to increasingly become limiting in terms of the potential value they can deliver. So what we're seeing is many of our clients are forming these partnerships and becoming part of the Amazon ecosystem, the Apple ecosystem, the Google ecosystem. And through that, they can focus on specific areas where they can begin to address the what if or how might we do this differently opportunities that really cannot be done by any one company any longer by themselves. And so you are seeing a company like Apple increasingly become partner friendly. You're seeing everyone running to Amazon and building the Echo interface. And those types of very challenging problems, voice recognition, you don't want to be solving for that. That problem's been solved for. You want to leverage those. You want to leverage the huge investment that's been made in mapping the earth. You don't want to try and replicate that. But when you begin to bring all of these, many of them open source, data-rich capabilities together in new ways, then you have an opportunity to really redefine your business and the type of experience you deliver to customers. Sanjay, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, no, I think that's very well said. Look, here's the deal. I mean, in my view, just exactly as you said, companies tend to form boundaries around the products they make, right? So if I'm Keurig, I make coffee machines. I'm going to keep using that example just to keep things consistent. What we need to do in this new era is ask the what if question and go beyond. But companies are also organized, mostly around people trained to operate within the boundary. By definition, IoT requires you to reach beyond the coffee machine into the life of the customer. It requires you to look beyond the coffee machine into the ecosystem that the coffee machine is going to be a part of, the Amazon, etc. Companies are also trained on your secret weapon, right? Your patent. But this new world requires the existential self-examination to say, listen, I'm never going to be a voice company, but Amazon has voice as a service. I'm just going to use it. Companies are also designed to say, well, this is what we're good at. We're not good at that stuff. Don't do it. You can't do that anymore. I mean, if you were a taxi driver 5 years ago and you took Mrs. Smith, the 80-year-old lady, to her therapist every Friday morning, you didn't expect to be disrupted. It's not fair that you were going to be disrupted, but you were, right? So we have to think, the term outside the box has become cliched, but we literally, in every dimension, have to think outside the four walls of the company. And we don't have the people to do that, unfortunately. There are a few. And you need to crowdsource in the company to get all these ideas. And if you talk to Google or, and Amazon, that's the way they operate. I mean, why is it that Google did the self-driving car and not GM or Ford? right? Because it was not the car that was new, it was the maps. And Google had the maps, right? So I think that this is, we need to equally existentially self-examine the way we operate as companies and the way we hire and the way we train and the way we liberate our employees to think outside the box.
I think that's absolutely right. And I'm going to go back to a question I saw just pop up, which asked, how does IoT and AR and VR begin to play out in the public sector? And I think there are significant opportunities there. We've been working with one of the largest public transportation systems in the United States and in the world, one that runs 24/7, that leaves very little time for repairing tracks and maintenance and upgrades. And one of the things they're doing is using IoT to do a much better job of letting the public know when trains are coming into stations, when they're going to be maintenance, and they're open sourcing that so that you can even begin to do some of this life hacking. Or if you are someone who provides, let's say, a set of smart services to an urban environment, you can use published API about train schedules now to begin informing the city population that you're serving and make those connections about when maybe they have to leave to get to an event, or letting them know they need to leave extra time for getting to work. And so we're going to see, I believe, the public sector realize a number of important benefits from this technology as we see the upgrade in our infrastructure now as we go forward.
You know, what's the Kennedy quote? Ask not what the country can do for you, ask what you can do for the country. I think IoT takes that to a whole new level, right? Smartphones, IoT,
Right.
et cetera.
That's right.
Yeah, great point. You know, it's interesting. The Economist had an IoT business benchmark where they surveyed, I think it was just under 1,000 companies of all sizes. And they said the top 3 IoT challenges faced are first, investment in IoT infrastructure, right? And then the security and privacy issues, which we referenced, followed by the limited knowledge and commitment from executives of the space. You know, so again, more training, more awareness is continued. And I just think these are very important aspects that we all need to look at, right? In terms of, is a company ready to accelerate their IoT
Absolutely.
journey? So let's do a couple more questions and we'll go back to the folks listening in to your questions. So again, the folks listening in, please continue to submit your questions and we will get to them. So Sanjay, you know, we've talked a lot about, you know, what's happening here with IoT, but is there a checklist or any key steps that you would provide to help companies who are just getting into designing for IoT that they should consider really doing?
Yeah, I think the first step is to buy my book. No, just kidding. I think that, look,
what's the name again?
it's
Say
the
the name
inversion
again.
factor. No, I'm just kidding. I think that, look, first of all, the name Internet of Things to me is a bit of a misnomer, right? Because is it Internet of Things? Is it the intelligence of things? I actually think it's a journey between from the Internet of Things, which is just connectivity, to the intelligence of things, which is connectivity and local computation, which includes, for example, embedded machine learning and AI, right? The cloud, et cetera, eventually to what I call the immersion of things, right? But it all starts with, again, what I call existential self-questioning. What business are you really in? What are people really trying to buy from you, right? So let's take the example of Ford. Ford thought it was selling cars. What it forgot was people just wanted transportation, damn it, right? So an Uber comes along. People are just using Uber. So a lot of my students who live all over the world, and especially in the Bay Area or in Boston, don't buy cars. Many of them don't know how to drive. They don't have driver's licenses. So Ford's just lost a whole customer base. Now, people will still buy the Mustang because it's a great car, right? But they aren't going to buy the Ford Focus. Is going to be in trouble because that is commodity and that's serving the market of transportation. So Sun Tzu said a journey of 1,000 miles or whatever begins with the first step. The first step is existential self-questioning. What business are you in? Myriad other ways will consumers find to address that need. And how can you own, because you're still your customer, you have a last chance, a second last chance to own the experience and how. And as I said, using IoT as a design language, you can begin to do that. And the Amazon example and the Amazon Echo continues to be an example for that.
I want to add one thing about Amazon that I think is really important for people to keep in mind. One of the real challenges for companies today, particularly very successful companies, is breaking through a culture of risk aversion, because many executives feel like they have to just continue on the path they're on. And it's very rare, if ever, that what got you where you got to today is going to take you where you need to go. And so you need to begin to introduce a culture that is embracing failure. I've written about this. It's called intelligent failure. You want to learn fast. You want to fail fast. You want to understand and celebrate failures and incorporate what you learned going forward. And I think that then opens up all sorts of opportunities. And the reason I love Amazon is because they have very publicly released things like Fire and tablets and phones and other devices that have never taken off. But they've learned at each one of those moments where they've released these products that you can no longer get, what it takes to make a successful product. And so we're seeing for the first time the headless computer, if you will, the keyboardless computer, the computer without a screen showing up in everyone's home who can afford one. And we'll see it show up in homes of people who can't afford one, because it just makes sense for Amazon and for Google and for others to start giving them away in the next few years because of all the services that they can monetize if we have them in our lives.
Good.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know we're getting almost to the top of the hour. So what I'd like to do to finish up here is there's a few questions in the Ask the Questions about skill sets that are needed, as well as organizational requirements. If I could ask our panelists just to make a few comments about the skill sets required and then organizational requirements. And then let's do a couple top 2 takeaways, which is why we, or how we typically end the Hangouts. Then I think we'll wrap. Okay. So Theo or Sanjay, do you want to jump in and talk about organizational requirements, skill sets?
Let me take a stab at skill sets because I'm a professor. I think that, of course, there are skill sets. You need to learn certain things like, technologies behind IoT, machine learning, et cetera, et cetera. But the most difficult skill set to teach, in my view, is one of questioning. And that's both for the person and the organization that will tolerate that. I'll stop there in the interest of time.
And I'll just build on that and say I think the biggest organizational challenge is breaking the silos that exist within all large companies, because really the way you get to these innovative answers to what if is by bringing interdisciplinary teams together, often teams that haven't worked together before, and solve these problems in a new way. And the new way that most companies are adopting is around design thinking and human-centered design. I was with one of the largest consumer packaged good company this week, and their IT organization has completely embraced it. And when they meet with the business to solve new problems or to embrace new opportunities, they start with an interdisciplinary workshop that brings together all parts of the business and puts the customer at the middle of it and says, what if we tried to do this in a new way? Or how might we solve for this problem in a new way? So break down those silos.
Excellent. Great points. And just to go ahead and wrap, if I could ask each panelist, starting with you, Sanjay, just 2 takeaways that you suggest the audience remember from the dialogue. Obviously, we hope everyone remembers everything, but what would your top 2 be that you want to really
I think the first is think of all these technologies as a new vocabulary, new verbs, new nouns to construct new narratives for experiences, and to plug your product into that and to rethink your product along those lines. And if I had another takeaway, it would be question your business.
Great. Good things to remember.
Yeah, I think, this is an inside and outside in view for business leaders. I think internally comes down to recognizing that there's no one part of your company that's going to be able to solve for what will make you relevant going forward to your customers or potentially new customers, because you got a lot of new competitors, I can tell you that are showing up. So that You need to break down those walls and begin taking an interdisciplinary approach to solving these problems. And externally, you need to be thinking about what is your ecosystem of partners in the future and begin leveraging what they can do to make you successful and your customers more delighted about your brand. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Yeah, no, that's fabulous. Definitely the customer experience. I'd also like to reference listeners to the Economist Business Index I mentioned before. It references 3 areas that companies have turned to most to accelerate their IoT efforts. These are 1, learning from the successes or failures of early movers; 2, training existing staff to work with IoT, so making sure you have the right skill sets; and then 3, seeking advice from third-party experts or consultants. Of course, Altitude's always happy to work with you, but that isn't meant to be a sales pitch. And so what I really would ask you is to encourage you, look at Sanjay's book, look through the index. It might give you some pointers. Listen again to this hangout. I think it would be valuable. Please do look at our website, altitudeinc.com. We have free, valuable resources for you that can help you continue on your IoT and design journey. And Theo and Sanjay, absolutely appreciate your taking the time. Your insights are invaluable. I hope everyone listening in enjoyed the lively dialogue. And thank you again, everyone, for the time you've taken today. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.